The door slammed and opened so hard the hinges screamed. Every head in Grinder's bar turned toward the sound. The truckers near the pool table, the old man nursing whiskey at the counter, Dottie behind the bar with a ref in her hand. All of them froze, staring at the figure standing in the doorway. A girl, 7 years old. Red jacket, 2 sizes too big sleeves hanging past her wrists, brown hair tangled and wild like she'd been running through branches. Dirt on her knees, a scrape on her chin, and her eyes, wide glassy, locked onto something at the far end of the room like a compass finding north. She didn't look at the truckers. She didn't look at the old man. She didn't stop at the bar or ask Dottie for help. She ran straight to the back corner where 12 bikers sat around a cluster of tables. Beer bottles, sweating rings onto scarred wood leather vests draped over the backs of chairs. The largest man looked up. His name was Mason, 48 years old. A scar ran from his left temple to the edge of his jaw, a pale ridge of tissue that caught the light whenever he turned his head. Gray streaked through his beard like frost through iron. His hands were rough knuckles swollen from decades of work and worse. He wore a black leather vest with a steel raven stitched across the back wings, spread wide talons open. He set down his bottle slowly, not because he was calm, because he'd learned a long time ago that moving slowly kept other people from panicking. The girl stopped 3 feet in front of him. Her whole body trembled, not just her hands, her shoulders, her jaw, her knees. She was shaking the way a dog shakes in a thunderstorm, involuntary, full-body desperate. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. Please, her voice cracked on the word. Split it right down the middle. I need help. Mason leaned forward. His chair groaned under his weight. When he spoke, his voice came out the way it always did with children and frightened animals. Low, gentle, like gravel wrapped in cloth. What's your name, sweetheart? Lily. Where's your mama, Lily? Lily's hands shook so hard she could barely grip the collar of her red jacket. She pulled it down. Not fast, not dramatic. Slowly, like she was peeling back a bandage she knew would hurt. The collar dropped past her shoulder. Bruises, purple and green and sickly yellow, layered on top of each other like a map of suffering drawn over weeks and months. Fingerprints pressed into her skin so deep they looked branded. They're burned in by someone who hadn't just grabbed her once, but had grabbed her over and over in the same spot with the same terrible force. A younger biker shot to his feet. His chair hit the floor behind him with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet bar. His name was Jace, 35. He had a daughter about Lily's age, a girl named Addison, who drew pictures of horses and slept with a nightlight shaped like a moon. Seeing those bruises on a child's shoulder made something behind his ribs twist so hard he thought he might be sick. Jesus Christ. Mason's chest tightened. He'd seen a lot in 48 years. He'd been in fights that left men broken on the ground. He'd held a friend's hand while the man bled out on a roadside in the rain. He'd stood at graves and said nothing because there was nothing left to say. But seeing those marks on a child's skin, seeing the pattern of adult fingers pressed into flesh that should never have been touched in anger, that did something to him he couldn't name, something deep and old and furious. He kept his voice calm. He owed her that. Who did this to you? Lily's lip quivered. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. Mom says we have to stay quiet. Those words hit Mason like a fist to the sternum. Not the bruises, not the shaking. Those words. Your mom told you to stay quiet about this? Lily nodded. She wiped her face with her sleeve, but the tears kept coming faster than she could catch them, faster than the fabric could absorb. She says if we tell, he'll do worse, but he hurt her real bad last night. She couldn't get up this morning. I tried to help her, but she just kept crying. I couldn't make her stop crying. Mason felt something break inside him. Not anger. Anger was simple. Anger was a fire you could point at something and let burn. This was different. This was something protective and ancient, something that lived in the marrow of a man's bones and didn't wake up unless a child was in danger. It was the thing that made fathers stand between their families in the dark. The thing that made strangers run into burning buildings. The thing that said in a voice older than language, not on my watch. He stood. The other bikers stood with him. Every man at that table rose at the same time like a single organism responding to a single signal. 12 men, 12 faces. The same look in every pair of eyes. Where is she now? Lily swallowed. Her throat clicked. Miller Road. The blue trailer. Number 17. Mason turned to the man on his left, a biker named Blade. Lean, quiet, the kind of man who said 10 words a day and meant every one of them. His face was all angles and shadow, and his eyes never blinked when they should have. Get the truck. Blade walked toward the back door without a word. His boots didn't make a sound on the floor. Mason looked at another biker. Patch, 50s, gray hair cropped short. He'd been a combat medic in Iraq, 3 tours, the kind of man who could set a broken bone in a ditch while mortars fell 100 yards away. He carried a medical bag everywhere he went, the way other men carried wallets. Patch, we're bringing someone who needs you. Be ready. Patch nodded once. He was already reaching for his bag under the table. Mason looked at Wire next. Late 20s, thin as a rail, fingers that moved across a keyboard like a pianist playing a concerto. Wire was the club's tech man. He could find a person's entire life story in 20 minutes with nothing but a phone and a Wi-Fi signal. The man who did this. Find out everything you can. Name's going to come from Lily. I want his record, his address, his work schedule, his blood type if you can get it. Wire already had his phone out. Then Mason knelt down in front of Lily. His knees cracked. His back protested. Up close, he could see the fear in her eyes more clearly now. Not just fear of the man who'd hurt her. Fear that she'd made a mistake coming here. Fear that these strangers would turn her away the way every other adult in her life had turned her away. He could see the exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes. The way her body swayed slightly, like a tree that had been standing in a storm for so long, it had forgotten how to be still. He could see the weight, the terrible, impossible weight that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. The weight of silence, the weight of secrets, the weight of being the only person willing to do something. When does he come home? Mason asked. 5. He works at the factory. Mason checked his watch. 2:15, less than 3 hours. He reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. The one without bruises. His hand was enormous next to her. It could have wrapped around her entire arm twice. But he touched her the way you'd touch a bird with a broken wing. Lily, listen to me. You did the right thing coming. Do you hear me? You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Her chin trembled. I was so scared. I didn't know where else to go. You came to the right place. Mason's throat tightened. He swallowed it down. There would be time for feeling later. Right now, this girl needed him to be a wall. We're going to go get your mama, and we're going to make sure nobody ever hurts either of you again. That's a promise. What if he comes back early? Mason's eyes went hard. The gentleness didn't leave his voice, but something underneath it changed. Something that would have made most grown men take a step back. Then we handle it. Lily looked up at him. She studied his face the way children study faces, with total honesty, searching for the lie. She didn't find one. Something in his expression must have reached her because she nodded. For the first time since she'd walked through that door, her breathing slowed. Just slightly. Just enough. Dottie came over from the bar. She carried a glass of water and a plate of fries. She set them down on the table in front of Lily, without a word, then crouched beside her. Eat something, honey. You look like you haven't eaten all day. Lily stared at the fries. Her stomach growled so loud the men at the table could hear it. She reached out, grabbed one, put it in her mouth. Then another. Then another. She ate like she was starving, because she was. Dottie looked at Mason. Her eyes were wet. Her jaw was tight. That bastard. Yeah. Dottie walked back behind the bar. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Mason didn't ask who she was calling. He had a feeling he already knew. Hawk, the oldest man in the club, spoke from his chair. He hadn't stood with the others, not because he didn't want to, but because his right knee had been rebuilt twice, and standing fast wasn't something it did anymore. 72 years old, a veteran of the Gulf War 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. He'd seen combat in the desert, seen things that still visited him at 3 in the morning, when the house was quiet and the darkness pressed in. His voice came out the way sandpaper sounds on rough wood. Kid's got guts. Mason nodded. Yeah, she does. Hawk watched Lily eat. His expression was unreadable, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Reminds me of someone, Hawk said quietly. Someone I couldn't help a long time ago. He didn't elaborate. Nobody asked him to. Jay stepped forward. His face was pale. His hands were fists at his sides. Are we riding? Mason shook his head. The truck's quieter. We don't want to draw attention. Not yet. The word yet hung in the air like smoke. 11:43 the night before. The front door of the trailer slammed open so hard the whole structure shuddered. Lily was lying on her mattress. Not a bed, a mattress on the floor, no frame, no box. Spring just a thin rectangle of foam on stained carpet with a blanket that wasn't thick enough to keep out the cold. She held her stuffed rabbit tight against her chest. His name was Biscuit. He was missing his left ear. Derek had ripped it off 3 months ago when Lily wouldn't stop crying after he'd shoved her mother into the kitchen counter. He'd grabbed the rabbit from her hands, torn the ear away in one savage motion, and thrown it back at her. She'd found the ear under the couch later, tried to sew it back on with thread she'd taken from her mother's sewing kit. The stitches didn't hold. The ear fell off again the next day. She kept it in the small drawer beside her mattress next to a dollar bill, 2 quarters, and 3 dimes. Heavy footsteps in the living room. The sound of work boots on cheap linoleum, each step landing like a hammer strike. Then the refrigerator door opening, a bottle cap hitting the counter. Her mother's voice came from somewhere near the kitchen. Quiet, careful, measured in that specific way that meant she was already calculating, already trying to read the temperature of the room, already adjusting herself to whatever version of him had walked through the door. You're home late, don't start. Derek's voice was slurred, thick at the edges like the words had to fight their way past his tongue. Lily knew that voice. She knew all his voices. The sober voice that was cold and controlled. The drinking voice that was loose and mean. The morning voice that pretended nothing had happened. But the drunk voice was the worst because the drunk voice didn't pretend anything. The drunk voice said exactly what it wanted and did exactly what it pleased. I said, don't start. Glass breaking. A bottle maybe, or a dish swept off the counter. The sound was sharp and final like a period at the end of a sentence that shouldn't have been written. Lily pulled the blanket up to her chin. Her heart began to beat faster. She pressed Biscuit against her chest and closed her eyes, but closing her eyes didn't close her ears. Derek, please. Lily is sleeping. I don't care if she's sleeping. Just go to bed. Please don't tell me what to do. A slap. Sharp and loud, the sound of an open hand hitting the side of a face with enough force to turn a head. Her mother gasped. Not a scream, a gasp. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been hit so many times they don't have screams left. Lily sat up. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to run out there. She wanted to grab the lamp, the one that still worked, and throw it at Derek's head. She wanted to scream at him to stop, to leave, to go away and never come back. But last time she tried that, Derek had grabbed her arm and thrown her against the hallway wall. The back of her head had hit the drywall hard enough to leave a dent. She'd seen stars, actual stars, like in cartoons, except they weren't funny. She'd slid to the floor and sat there while the world spun around her. That was where most of the bruises on her shoulder came from. Not one hit, a pattern, a history, a map of every time she'd tried to intervene and paid for it. Her mother's voice shook in the living room. Please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're always sorry. Another slap. Harder. Then a thud, something heavy hitting the floor. A body. Her mother's body. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. Get up. Derek's voice. Low, mean. The voice of a man who enjoyed what he was doing. I can't. Her mother's voice was barely there, a whisper scraped across broken glass. You hurt my ribs. I said, get up. A scream. Short, sharp, cut off fast, like someone had clamped a hand over her mother's mouth mid-cry. Then silence, then crying. Soft, broken, hopeless crying. The kind that comes from a person who has given up trying to make it stop and is just waiting for it to end. Lily's whole body went cold. The tears kept falling. She pressed both hands over her ears as hard as she could, pushed until it hurt, until the pressure in her head drowned out everything except her own heartbeat and the sound of her own breathing. But she could still hear her mother crying. Through her hands, through the walls, through everything, she could always hear it. She squeezed Biscuit so tight the stuffing bunched up between her fingers. She whispered into the rabbit's remaining ear, the words barely audible, even to herself. It's okay, Biscuit. Mama's going to be okay. She always is. She always is. But Lily didn't believe it anymore. She hadn't believed it in a long time. She lay there in the dark for what felt like hours. The sounds eventually stopped. The trailer went quiet, but Lily couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, at the water stains shaped like a dog, at the crack that ran from the corner to the light fixture, at the cobweb in the corner that had been there since they'd moved in and that nobody had ever bothered to clean. She thought about her teacher, Mrs. Palmer, a kind woman with glasses and a soft voice who kept a jar of butterscotch candies on her desk. Mrs. Palmer had talked to the class one afternoon about what to do if someone was hurting you. She'd used words like trusted adult and safe space, and it's never your fault. She'd said that asking for help was the bravest thing a person could do. Lily had believed her. She'd gone to the school counselor the next week, a woman named Ms. Fredericks who had posters of kittens on her wall and a bowl of mints on her desk. Lily had sat in the chair across from her and told her about Derek, about the hitting, about the yelling, about the nights when she lay on her mattress and listened to her mother cry. Ms. Fredericks had listened. She'd taken notes. She'd said she was going to help. Then she'd called Lily's mother. Sarah had come to the school within the hour. She'd walked in wearing long sleeves even though it was 85 degrees outside. She'd smiled. She'd sat down across from Ms. Fredericks and spoken in that calm, careful voice she used when she was performing for an audience. Everything's fine. Just a misunderstanding. Kids exaggerate sometimes. You know how they are. Active imaginations. Ms. Fredericks had looked at Lily. Lily had looked at her mother. And in her mother's eyes, behind the smile, behind the performance, Lily had seen the terror. Not terror of being caught. Terror of what would happen when they got home. They didn't go home right away. Sarah drove to the grocery store, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring through the windshield at nothing. Then she turned to Lily in the back seat. Baby, I need you to understand something. If people know what's happening, it gets worse, not better. Worse. Derek has friends. He knows people. If the police come, he'll talk his way out of it, and then he'll be angry. Angrier than you've ever seen him. Do you understand? Lily had nodded because she was 7, and her mother was the center of her universe, and when your universe tells you to be quiet, you obey. That night, Derek had made sure Lily understood the cost of telling. He hadn't used his fists. He'd used his words, which were worse in some ways because words didn't leave visible bruises, but they left marks all the same. He'd stood over her mattress and told her what would happen if she ever talked to anyone at school again. His voice had been calm, controlled, sober, the most dangerous version of him. So Lily stopped telling. She stopped talking about it at school. She stopped looking at Ms. Fredericks in the hallway. She learned to wear long sleeves even when it was hot. She learned to say she felt pain when someone noticed a mark on her arm. She learned to smile when adults asked if everything was okay at home. She learned to be quiet. But lying there in the dark in the hours after midnight, listening to the silence that had replaced her mother's crying, a silence that was somehow worse, because at least crying meant her mother was conscious, Lily made a decision. She was done being quiet. Morning light came through the thin curtain like a blade. Lily sat up, listened. The trailer was silent in a different way now. Not the silence of fear, the silence of absence. She stood slowly, walked to her bedroom door, opened it a crack. Through the window at the end of the hall, you could see the driveway. Derek's truck was gone. The space where it usually sat was just oil-stained gravel and empty air. Lily walked down the narrow hallway. Her bare feet made no sound on the old linoleum. The floor was cold. The trailer was always cold even when the heat was on because the heat was never on. Derek said it cost too much. Derek said a lot of things about money, usually right before he came home with another case of beer. She found her mother in the living room, on the couch, under the thin blanket, still in the same position she'd been in when Lily had last heard her crying, which meant she'd either been too hurt to move or too exhausted to try to. Mama, Sarah's eyes opened. The right one was swollen nearly shut, a dark purple crescent that ran from her cheekbone to her brow. Her lower lip was split. Blood had dried on her chin in a dark streak. More bruising on her neck, the kind that came from fingers wrapped around a throat and squeezed. Baby. Her voice was raw, scraped hollow like something that had been used up and discarded. You should be in bed. It's morning. Derek left for work. Sarah tried to sit up. She gasped, pressed her hand to her left side, and fell back against the couch. Her face went white, the kind of white that meant real pain, not surface pain, not bruise pain, but something deeper, something structural, something broken. Lily ran to her side. "Don't move. You're hurt. I'm okay." "You're not okay, Mama." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not the silent tears of the night before. These were different. These came with shame. "Lily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to see this." Lily knelt on the floor beside the couch. She took her mother's hand. It was trembling. The knuckles were bruised. Defensive wounds, though Lily didn't know that term. She just knew her mother's hands looked like they'd been fighting and losing. "We have to leave, Mama. We have to get away from him. We can't." "Why not?" Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, the tears spilled down both cheeks, running into the dried blood on her chin. "We have nowhere to go. No money, no family nearby. No one who would take us in. We can ask someone for help." Sarah shook her head slowly, carefully, like even the motion of her neck caused pain. "I've tried that before. It doesn't work. People don't want to get involved. And Derek always finds me. He always brings me back. Then we have to do something different." Sarah reached out and touched Lily's face. Her fingers were cold. "Baby, I need you to be strong for me. Just a little longer. I'm going to figure something out. I promise." Lily stared at her mother. At the bruises, the blood, the swollen eye, the split lip. She'd heard that promise before. She'd heard it 6 months ago and 3 months ago and last month and last week. The promise was always the same. The result was always the same. Nothing changed. Nothing ever changed. Except today. Today, something had changed inside Lily. She didn't have a word for it. She was 7, and 7-year-olds don't have vocabulary for the moment when fear finally burns itself out, and what's left underneath is something harder and colder and more determined than fear ever was. She stood up. "I'm going to get you some water." She walked to the kitchen, stepped around the broken glass on the floor, filled a cup from the tap, brought it back. Sarah drank slowly, wincing with each swallow, because even the act of swallowing pulled at muscles connected to broken ribs. Lily sat on the floor beside the couch. She didn't say anything. She just sat. Sarah reached down and stroked her hair the way she always did, the way that was supposed to make everything feel normal, even when nothing was. "I love you, baby. You know that, right?" "I know. Everything I do is to keep you safe." Lily didn't answer, because she didn't feel safe. She hadn't felt safe in a long time. And she was beginning to understand with a clarity that no child should possess that her mother couldn't keep her safe. Her mother couldn't even keep herself safe. So Lily was going to find someone who could. She sat on the front steps of the trailer with Biscuit in her lap. The sun was up, but the air was cold. October in Riverton, a small town in the flat middle of nowhere, the kind of place that looked tired even in good light. Miller Road stretched out in both directions, a row of trailers on each side. Some kept up, most not. A few had people sitting outside in lawn chairs, smoking, staring at phones, staring at nothing. Nobody ever helped. Lily knew this. She'd watched their neighbors hear the screaming through thin walls. She'd seen them look away when Sarah walked to the mailbox with sunglasses covering her bruises. She'd heard them tell each other in the way adults talk when they think children can't hear that it was none of their business. That you couldn't get involved in other people's marriages. That Sarah probably provoked him. That it takes two. Lily had learned that the world was full of adults who looked the other way, who heard a child crying and turned up their television, who saw bruises and believed the lie about falling downstairs because believing the lie was easier than doing something about the truth. But she'd also heard something else, something the older kids at school whispered about during recess, the way kids whisper about things that are half legend and half fear. There was a bar on the other side of town, a place called Grinders. Bikers hung out there. Dangerous people, the grown-ups said in the same voice they used to talk about rattlesnakes and electrical storms. People you cross the street to avoid. But Lily didn't care about dangerous anymore. Dangerous was what waited for her at 5 o'clock every evening. Dangerous was the sound of Derek's truck pulling into the driveway. Dangerous was sleeping in a trailer where the walls were thin enough to hear everything and too thin to stop anything. She needed help, and dangerous people were the only ones who seemed willing to fight. She stood, walked inside. Sarah was sleeping on the couch, her breathing shallow and uneven, each inhale a small battle against broken ribs. Lily went to her room, opened the small drawer beside her mattress. Inside was the dollar bill, the 2 quarters, the 3 dimes. $1.80. Everything she owned in the world. She put it in her pocket. She walked back to the living room, stood beside the couch, looked at her mother's face, bruised and broken and still somehow beautiful in the way that mothers are always beautiful to their children, even when the world has done its worst. I'm going to fix this, Mama. I promise. Sarah didn't wake up. Lily walked to the front door, opened it, stepped outside into the cold October air. She held Biscuit against her chest with one arm and started walking. The walk took 30 minutes. Her feet hurt. She was wearing old sneakers with a hole in the right toe, and the sidewalk was uneven, cracked in places where tree roots had pushed up through the concrete. She passed the gas station, where the man behind the counter always looked bored. She passed the laundromat with the broken dryer that had an out-of-order sign taped to it for as long as she could remember. She passed the corner store where older kids bought candy and energy drinks. She turned onto the main road, and there it was. Grinder's Bar. A low, flat building with faded red paint peeling off the walls in long strips. A neon sign in the window that said, "Open though." 2 of the letters were burned out. A gravel parking lot with 8 motorcycles parked in a row. Big machines, chrome and black, heavy and loud even when they were standing still. They looked like sleeping animals, powerful even at rest. Lily stopped across the street. Her heart was pounding. Her mouth was dry. She looked at the motorcycles, at the dark windows of the bar, at the heavy wooden door. She thought about all the things that could go wrong. They could laugh at her. They could ignore her. They could call Derek. They could be worse than Derek. She squeezed Biscuit. "It's okay," she whispered. "We can do this." She crossed the street, walked across the gravel parking lot past the motorcycles up to the door. She stopped, took a breath, pushed it open, and ran straight to the back corner where 12 bikers sat drinking beer. A black Ford pickup pulled up to the front of Grinder's Bar. The engine rumbled low, the sound of a machine built for work. Not show. Blade sat in the driver's seat, hands steady on the wheel. His face revealed nothing. It never did. Mason walked out of the bar with Lily. His hand rested on her shoulder, the unhurt one, so lightly that she could have shrugged it off without effort. But she didn't. She leaned into it slightly, the way a person leans toward warmth. 8 bikers followed. They climbed into the bed of the truck, and without a word, without discussion, without hesitation. Each man moved with purpose, the way men move when they have decided to do something and are past the point of talking about it. Jace, Hawk, Wire, Patch. 4 others whose road names didn't matter right now. What mattered was that they were there. 2 more stayed behind to ride their motorcycles as escort. Lily sat in the front seat between Mason and Blade. She was so small her feet didn't reach the floor. She held Biscuit in her lap, gripping the rabbit's remaining ear between her thumb and forefinger. Blade glanced at her. His eyes were dark, his face all sharp edges, but when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly soft. "That's a good-looking rabbit." Lily looked down at Biscuit. "His name's Biscuit. He's missing an ear. I can see that. What happened to it? Derek ripped it off when I wouldn't stop crying one time." Blade's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. The tendons in his forearms stood out like cables. Mason looked straight ahead through the windshield. His jaw was set like stone. But when he spoke, his voice was soft, controlled. A man choosing his words the way a surgeon chooses an incision. "You won't have to cry like that anymore, Lily. Not like that. Not ever again." The truck pulled out of the parking lot. Behind them, 2 motorcycles roared to life. The sound echoed down the empty street, deep and rolling like thunder moving across a valley. Lily stared out the window. She watched the buildings of Riverton slide past. The gas station, the laundromat, the corner store, the same route she'd walked an hour ago alone and terrified. Now she was moving through it, surrounded by men she'd known for less than 30 minutes, who had stood up for her when no one else in her entire life ever had. She didn't say anything, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Something small and fragile and warm, buried so deep inside her that she hadn't known it was still alive. Hope. In the truck bed, Hawk sat with his back against the cab. The wind cut through his gray hair. He looked at Jace across from him. How old's your daughter now? 8. Just had her birthday last week. Does she know what you do? Jace shook his head. She knows I ride. She knows the club looks out for people. But she doesn't know about this part. The part where we show up at trailers and pull broken women off couches. You ever worry about her getting hurt every damn day? Jace's voice was tight, something in it that he usually kept locked down. That's why we do this. So other kids don't have to live like Lily. Hawk nodded slowly. He looked at the road unspooling behind them, at the flat, featureless landscape of central Riverton. I had a sister, Hawk said. His voice was quiet, barely audible over the wind. She married a man like this when she was 22. I was overseas. Gulf War. By the time I got back, she'd been in the hospital twice. Broken arm, broken collarbone. The second time she had internal bleeding. Nobody paused, nobody interrupted. They just listened. I went to find him, found him at a bar not much different from Grinders. Told him if he touched her again, I'd kill him. He laughed at me, called me a has-been. Hawk's jaw tightened. He hit her again 2 weeks later. She didn't go to the hospital that time. She went to the morgue. The wind blew through the truck bed. Nobody spoke. That was 31 years ago, Hawk said. I think about her every single day. He looked toward the front of the truck where Lily sat invisible behind the glass. That's why I'm here. That's why I'll always be here. Wire leaned against the side of the truck bed. He'd pulled up everything he could find on his phone. His face was lit by the screen's blue glow. Derek Holt, 39, 2 assault charges, 1 domestic violence conviction. Did 6 months in county lockup 2 years ago. Released early. How did he get out? Jace asked. Good behavior. Wire's voice was bitter the way a man's voice gets when he understands how a system works and hates it. The system's a joke. System failed, Hawk said. Failed Lily. Failed her mom. That's why we're here. Wire scrolled further. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed. Hold on. Derek Holt has a relative in law enforcement. The truck bed went quiet. Deputy Wade Pruitt, Riverton County Sheriff's Department. He's Derek's cousin. First cousin, Jace asked. First cousin. They grew up together. Played football at the same high school. Pruitt's been on the force for 12 years. Wire looked up from his phone. His expression was flat controlled, but his eyes were hard. I pulled the case files on Derek's 2 assault charges. Both times the arresting officer recommended prosecution. Both times the charges were reduced. Both times the one who signed off on the reduced charges was the same deputy. Wade Pruitt Mason said from inside the cab. He'd heard every word through the open rear window. Wade Pruitt Wire confirmed. He's been covering for Derek for years. Domestic calls to Miller Road, there's been 4 in the last 18 months. Every single one, Pruitt responded. Every single one, he wrote it up as unfounded. No charges, no follow-up. Jace looked at Hawk. Hawk looked at the road. Mason's voice came through the window again. Steady, hard. That means we can't call the police. Not the local ones, not yet. We do this ourselves first. We get them safe. Then we figure out the law. The truck turned onto Miller Road. The street looked worse in daylight. Sagging roofs and broken windows. Yards full of trash and rusted engine parts. A shopping cart on its side in a ditch. A dog chained to a post watching them with dull eyes. Blade drove slowly, looking for number 17. Lily pointed through the windshield. There. The blue one. It wasn't blue anymore. Maybe it had been once years ago when someone cared enough to paint it. Now it was faded gray with streaks of rust running down the sides like dried tears. The front steps were crooked, one side sinking into the mud. A window was covered with cardboard and duct tape. The gutters hung at broken angles. The whole structure looked exhausted, like it had been holding itself together out of habit and was running out of reasons. The truck stopped in front of the trailer. The motorcycles pulled up behind it. Mason looked at Lily. His voice was firm but gentle. You stay in the truck. Understand? She nodded. Lock the doors after we get out. Don't open them unless it's me or Blade. Got it? Got it. Mason touched her shoulder. One more time. Gentle. The way a man touches something precious. We'll bring your mama out, I promise. He and Blade climbed out. The bikers jumped down from the truck bed. They moved quietly, deliberately, with the coordinated silence of men who had done difficult things together before and didn't need to discuss how to do them again. Lily watched them walk toward the trailer. Her heart was pounding again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something that felt almost like relief, almost like the first breath after being underwater for too long. Mason walked up the crooked steps. The wood screamed under his weight. He knocked on the door. 3 times, firm but not aggressive. No answer, he knocked again. "Ma'am, my name is Mason. Your daughter Lily sent us. We're here to help." Still nothing. Mason tried the handle. Unlocked, he pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit him first. Stale beer, cigarettes, something sour and biological underneath it all. The smell of fear and pain, and a body that had been lying in one position for too long. The living room was small and ruined. A couch with torn fabric, a television balanced on a milk crate, empty bottles on the floor, some standing, some on their sides, some broken. A lamp in the corner with no shade, its bulb dead. Food wrappers everywhere, fast food bags and chip bags and the wax paper from gas station sandwiches. The carpet was stained in overlapping patterns that told a story nobody would want to read. And on the couch, curled up under a thin blanket, was a woman. She didn't move when the door opened. She didn't flinch. She lay perfectly still, the way an animal lies still when it has given up trying to escape a trap. Mason stepped inside. "Careful. Slow, ma'am." Her eyes opened. One was swollen nearly shut, a dark crescent of bruised tissue that had gone past purple into something almost black. Her lip was split. Blood had dried on her chin and neck. More bruises on her arms, on her throat, the kind of marks that came from hands that had wrapped and squeezed and held on long after they should have let go. She tried to sit up, gasped, pressed her hand to her left side and fell back. The gasp became a low moan, the sound of bone grinding against bone of ribs that had been broken and were protesting every movement. "Don't move." Mason's voice was gentle. He knelt beside the couch the way he'd knelt in front of Lily. "Your daughter Lily came to us. Asked for help. We're here to get you out." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Not relief, not yet. You can't. He'll kill us." "No, he won't. You don't understand. He'll find us. He always finds us. He has people. He has his cousin." Mason looked her in the eyes. His voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who had been tested many times and had never once failed the test. "Ma'am, I've dealt with men like Derek Holt my whole life. They're bullies. They're cowards. And they only have power because nobody stands up to them. We're standing up. He's not going to hurt you or Lily ever again. I give you my word." She stared at him, searching his face for something. Truth, maybe, or maybe just the absence of a lie. She'd been lied to so many times by so many people that she'd almost forgotten what honesty looked like. "Who are you?" "My name's Mason. I'm president of the Steel Ravens Motorcycle Club. And those men outside, they're my brothers. We protect people who can't protect themselves. It's what we do. It's what we've always done." A tear rolled down her cheek, tracing a path through the dried blood. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Because Lily had the courage to ask, and because no child should ever have to live like this. Sarah broke. She covered her face with both hands and sobbed. The sound was raw, ugly, the kind of crying that comes from the deepest part of a person, the part that has been holding everything together for months and years, and has finally been given permission to let go. Mason stood. He walked to the door and called outside. "Patch, get in here." Patch walked in, medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Sarah with the practiced calm of a man who had treated wounds in places far worse than this. "Ma'am, my name's Patch. I'm going to check your injuries. I need you to tell me where it hurts the most." Sarah lowered her hands, looked at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "My ribs, left side. It hurts when I breathe." Patch lifted her shirt just enough to see her side. The bruising was extensive, spreading across her rib cage in a dark bloom of purple and black, like ink spilled beneath skin. He pressed lightly with his fingertips. She winced, bit down on her lip hard enough to draw fresh blood. "Broken, at least 2, maybe 3. You need x-rays, proper medical care." Sarah shook her head fast. "No hospital. They'll ask questions. They'll call the police. Derek's cousin Wade is a deputy. He'll find out. He'll tell Derek where we are. He'll come for us." Mason's expression darkened at the mention of Wade Pruitt, but his voice stayed even. "We know about Wade. We've already factored that in. We have people who can get around him. You're going to see a doctor, a real one, someone we trust. And Wade Pruitt won't know a thing about it. Lily had been told to stay in the truck. She had. She'd sat there with the doors locked and Biscuit in her lap watching through the windshield as the bikers entered the trailer. She'd waited. She'd been patient. But then she remembered something. Under Mama's pillow. The second Biscuit. Months ago, Lily had found a second stuffed rabbit at a yard sale. Smaller than the original, lighter brown. Both ears intact. She'd bought it with her allowance, the $3 Sarah had scraped together. Lily kept one rabbit on her mattress and hid the second under her mother's pillow, so her mother would have something soft to hold on to during the bad nights. She needed to get it. She couldn't leave it in that trailer. She couldn't leave any piece of their old life behind that mattered. She unlocked the truck door, climbed down, walked quickly across the gravel and up the crooked steps past the bikers standing outside through the open door. Blade saw her. "Lily, you're supposed to stay in the truck. I need to get something." 1 minute. She ran down the narrow hallway to her mother's bedroom. The room was small and dark, the blinds closed, the air stale. The bed was unmade sheets tangled a pillow on the floor. Lily reached under the remaining pillow on the bed. Her fingers found the second biscuit. She pulled it out. And underneath the rabbit was a manila envelope, thick, sealed with tape. Lily's name was written on the front in her mother's handwriting, followed by 3 words that made Lily's heart stop. "In case something happens." Lily held the envelope. It was heavy. She peeled back the tape and looked inside. Photographs, dozens of them. Her mother's face swollen and bruised, taken at different times in different light, wearing different injuries. Each one dated on the back in pencil, some from 6 months ago, some from last week. Beneath the photos, printed screenshots of text messages from Derek's phone. Threats, descriptions of what he would do if Sarah ever tried to leave. Language so ugly that Lily didn't understand all the words, but she understood the intent. Beneath the text, a document, a petition for divorce, unsigned, undated, but filled out in Sarah's careful handwriting, every line completed, every box checked. Sarah had been planning to leave. She'd been building a case quietly, secretly for months, collecting evidence, documenting everything, preparing for the moment when she would finally have enough to walk out the door and never come back. But Derek had beaten her before she could file it, had broken her ribs before she could make her move. The envelope was a weapon she'd never gotten the chance to use. Lily tucked the envelope under her arm, held both rabbits against her chest, and walked back out to the living room. Mason looked at her. "What's that?" Lily held up the envelope. She didn't know what most of it meant, but she knew it was important. "Mama was keeping secrets too," Lily said. "Good secrets." Mason took the envelope, opened it, looked through the contents. His face changed as he turned each photograph, each screenshot, each page of the unsigned petition. When he looked up, his eyes were different, harder, more certain. "This changes things," he said quietly. He looked at Wire, who had followed them inside. "Get photos of all of this, every page. Back it up to 3 different places. This is evidence, real evidence. And when the time comes, this is what's going to bury Derek Holt." Wire took the envelope and began photographing each document, his phone clicking in the quiet room like a metronome. Mason looked at Lily. She stood there in the ruined living room of the ruined trailer, holding 2 stuffed rabbits, her red jacket hanging past her wrists, dirt on her knees, a scrape on her chin. She had walked 30 minutes alone. She had walked into a bar full of strangers. She had shown her bruises to men she'd never met. And now she had found the evidence. Her mother had spent months building the evidence that might save them both. 7 years old. Mason had known grown men with less courage. He made a phone call. It rang 3 times. A woman's voice answered. "Yeah. Helen, it's Mason. I need a favor. Talk to me." Domestic violence situation. A woman and a child. Need safe housing, medical care? No questions asked. Helen Marsh ran a shelter 2 towns over, a place that didn't appear on any map, funded by donations that came from people who understood that the system didn't always work and that sometimes safety required secrecy. She'd worked with the Steel Ravens before. She trusted them. How bad, she asked. Broken ribs, severe bruising, 7-year-old daughter covered in marks. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then her voice came back flat and hard, the voice of a woman who had heard this story 100 times and was still angry every single time. "Bring them to me. I'll have a room ready." The guy who did this. Being handled. Good. Mason hung up. He looked at Patch, who had finished wrapping Sarah's ribs with an ace bandage, tight enough to stabilize, gentle enough not to cause more damage. Can she move? Carefully, Patch said. I've given her something for the pain, but she needs a real doctor within 24 hours. Internal bleeding is a real risk with fractures like these. We'll handle it. They helped Sarah stand. She swayed, gripped Hawk's arm to steady herself. The old man held her with surprising gentleness, his weathered hand supporting her elbow as they walked slowly toward the door. Lily walked beside her mother. She held Sarah's hand on one side and both rabbits on the other. When they reached the truck, Sarah looked at her daughter. Her face was a ruin, but her eyes were clear. Baby, I'm so sorry. Lily hugged her, carefully, aware of the ribs. It's okay, Mama. We're safe now. Sarah started crying again, quiet, shaking sobs that she couldn't stop and didn't try to. Mason climbed into the front seat. Blade started the engine. The truck pulled away from the blue trailer on Miller Road, and in Mason's jacket pocket, tucked beside his phone, was the manila envelope that a 7-year-old girl had found under a pillow. The envelope that Sarah had built in secret, the evidence that Derek Holt didn't know existed. But it wasn't just evidence of Offender, it was evidence of something else. Evidence that Sarah had been fighting back the only way she knew how, quietly, carefully in the dark building, a case one photograph at a time, one screenshot at a time, one page at a time. And it was evidence that Lily came from a long line of women who refused to stay quiet forever. Behind them, the blue trailer sat empty, the crooked steps, the cardboard window, the rust stains running down the walls like old tears. But the bikers weren't done with Miller Road. Not yet. Not by a long way. Because somewhere in this town, a man named Derek Holt was finishing his shift at the plastics factory on Route 9. And he had a cousin with a badge who had been helping him get away with beating women and children for years. The Steel Ravens knew about both of them now, and the Steel Ravens didn't forget. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that didn't have a name. No sign, no mailbox, no address painted on a post. Just a narrow path cut through Virginia pines that went on for a quarter-mile before it opened into a clearing where a small wooden structure stood like something the forest had grown around and decided to keep. A club member named Wrench had bought the property 15 years ago, told his wife it was a hunting cabin, used it twice for deer season, used it 37 times for situations like this. Women escaping men who wanted to kill them, witnesses who needed to disappear for a while, people the system had chewed up and spit out and left standing in the road with nowhere to go. Helen Marsh was already there when the truck pulled into the clearing. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, a short woman in her 50s with silver hair cut close to her skull and the kind of eyes that had seen everything and were still willing to look. She wore jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She looked like someone's grandmother, and she was 3 times over. But she also looked like someone you didn't lie to because she'd know, and she wouldn't be kind about it. She walked to the truck before it stopped, opened the back door, looked at Sarah at the swollen eye, the split lip, the way she held her left side like she was keeping herself from falling apart. Come on, sweetheart, let's get you inside. Sarah leaned on her. They walked slowly toward the cabin, each step measured, each breath, a negotiation with broken ribs. Lily followed, holding both stuffed rabbits and the manila envelope she'd refused to let anyone else carry. Inside the cabin was warm. A fire burned in the stone fireplace. The floors were clean pine. 2 bedrooms in the back, each with a real bed, real sheets, real pillows. A kitchen stocked with food, canned goods, and pasta, and bread and eggs, and a carton of milk that hadn't expired. Someone had put fresh towels in the bathroom and a bar of soap still in its wrapper. It wasn't much, but after the trailer on Miller Road, it looked like a palace. Helen led Sarah to the nearest bedroom, helped her onto the bed, pulled a quilt up over her legs. A doctor's on the way. She'll be here in 20 minutes. You just rest. Sarah nodded. Her eyes were already starting to close. The pain medication Patch had given her was pulling her under, and her body, which had been running on fear and adrenaline for months, was finally giving itself permission to stop. Lily sat on the edge of the bed. She held her mother's hand. Sarah's fingers curled around hers, weak but present. Helen knelt beside Lily. Her voice was firm but warm, the voice of a woman who had comforted hundreds of children in rooms exactly like this one. "What's your name, honey, Lily?" "Lily, your mom is going to be okay. We're going to take good care of her. And of you." Lily looked at her. Her eyes were old. Too old for 7. "Are you sure Derek can't find us here?" "I'm sure. This place doesn't exist on any map. Nobody knows about it except the people who need to." Lily nodded, but her grip on Biscuit tightened, and Helen noticed and said nothing because she understood that trust wasn't something you could give a child with words. You had to earn it with time. Helen walked out to the living room where Mason and the others were waiting. She closed the bedroom door behind her gently. "How bad? Bad enough." Mason's voice was low. "Derek Holt's been beating her for at least a year, maybe longer. Lily's been covering for her mother, trying to protect her, wearing long sleeves, lying to teachers." Helen's face hardened. The muscles in her jaw tightened. That child shouldn't have to carry that weight. No, she shouldn't. Helen looked at him. 15 years she'd known Mason. 15 years of phone calls in the middle of the night, of women arriving at her shelter with broken bones and black eyes, of children who flinched when adults raised their hands to reach for a glass of water. She knew what Mason was capable of. She knew the line between justice and vengeance, and she knew he'd walk that line more times than either of them could count. "What are you going to do about Derek? We're going to have a conversation with him." "Don't do anything that puts you in prison, Mason. I mean it. These women need you. Lily needs you. You can't help anyone from behind bars. I'll be smart about it." Helen studied his face. She didn't look convinced. But she didn't push because she also knew that sometimes a conversation was exactly what a man like Derek Holt needed. A car pulled up outside, a sedan, dark blue, unremarkable. A woman in her 60s climbed out carrying a leather medical bag. Her name was Margaret Kane. She'd been a physician for 35 years, the last 10 spent volunteering at shelters and clinics that served people who couldn't afford hospitals or were too afraid to walk into one. Dr. Kane walked in. Helen led her to the bedroom. Lily stood when the door opened. "Is my mama going to be okay?" Dr. Kane smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that didn't promise too much. "I'm going to check on her, make sure everything's healing the way it should. You can stay if you want." Lily nodded. She sat back down on the edge of the bed and held her mother's hand while Dr. Kane examined her, checked her ribs, her breathing, the bruising on her torso and arms and neck, listened with a stethoscope, pressed gently on her abdomen, took her blood pressure. After 15 minutes, Dr. Kane stepped out into the living room. She pulled the bedroom door closed behind her. 3 broken ribs on the left side, severe contusions across her torso, arms, and face. Signs of strangulation on her neck, petechial hemorrhaging in both eyes. This wasn't a one-time incident. This has been sustained abuse over a significant period. Mason's jaw tightened until the scar on his face went white. How long until she can move around normally? 6 to 8 weeks for the ribs. With rest and proper care, she'll recover physically. But she needs to be monitored for the next 48 hours. Internal bleeding is still a concern. And Dr. Kane's expression changed. Something softer entered it, something that looked like grief. The bruises will fade, they always do. But what that child has been carrying, the secrecy, the fear, the responsibility of protecting her own mother, that doesn't fade on its own. She needs counseling, stability, safety, not just for weeks, for years. She'll have all 3, Mason said. Dr. Kane looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you for getting them out." Mason didn't respond. He just turned toward the door. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. He stepped outside. The afternoon light was fading. The trees around the cabin cast long shadows across the clearing. The other bikers stood near their motorcycles, talking quietly, smoking, waiting. Hawk walked over. His limp was worse in the cold. "What now?" Mason checked his watch. 4:15. "Now we go back to Miller Road. And we wait." The drive back to the cabin was quiet. No one spoke. The motorcycles rumbled behind the truck in a loose formation, their headlights cutting white paths through the dark. The sky was clear and cold and full of stars that didn't care what happened on the roads beneath them. Mason sat in the passenger seat and stared through the windshield. His hands were still. His face was still. But behind his eyes, something was working. He was thinking about Wade Pruitt, about a deputy who had answered domestic violence calls at that trailer 4 times in 18 months and had written every single one up as unfounded. About a man with a badge who had looked at a woman with bruises and a child with fingerprints pressed into her skin and had decided 4 separate times that nothing was wrong. That was the part that burned. Not Derek. Derek was what he was, a violent man who used his size to terrorize people smaller than himself. The world was full of Dereks, but Wade Pruitt had taken an oath. He'd put on a uniform and sworn to protect people, and instead he'd used that uniform as a shield for his cousin's cruelty. That was a different kind of evil, the kind that wore a clean shirt and filled out paperwork and went home at night believing it was someone else's problem. Mason intended to make it Wade Pruitt's problem, but not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was about Sarah and Lily. Everything else could wait until the morning. The street was quiet when they returned. Late afternoon, the sun sitting low and orange above the roof lines, casting everything in that amber light that made even ugly things look almost beautiful. Almost. The truck and motorcycles parked 2 houses down from the blue trailer, partially hidden behind a dumpster and a dead elm tree. Close enough to see the driveway. Far enough to avoid being spotted. Mason, Blade Hawk, and Jay sat in the truck. The others spread out on foot, watching from different positions along the street. Nobody spoke. This was the part they were good at. The waiting. The silence before action. The held breath before the exhale. Jace checked his phone. "My wife just texted. Wants to know when I'll be home." "What did you tell her?" Blade asked. "Told her I'm helping a friend. She knows better than to ask more." Hawk leaned back in his seat. The leather creaked under him. "My wife used to ask questions. First few years we were married, she wanted to know every detail. Where I was going, who I was with, what I was doing." "What changed?" Mason asked. "I told her the truth one night. Told her about a woman we helped back in '98. Her husband had beaten her so badly she lost sight in one eye. We got her out, got her somewhere safe. The husband ended up in the hospital." "What did your wife say?" Hawk smiled. It was a thin smile, more memory than humor. She said, "Good." Never asked questions after that. At 4:58, a truck appeared at the far end of Miller Road. Dirty white paint, dented front fender, exhaust pipe hanging low, coughing black smoke. The engine noise carried down the street like a warning. Mason sat up straight. "That's him." The truck pulled into the driveway of the blue trailer. The engine died. The door opened. A man climbed out. Derek Holt, 39 years old, 6'2", maybe 220, work boots caked with dust, jeans stained with chemical residue from the plastics factory, a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, broad shoulders, thick arms, the build of a man who used his body for a living and had learned somewhere along the way that his body could be used for other things too. He reached across the passenger seat and grabbed a 6-pack of beer, slammed the truck door, walked toward the trailer without looking around, without checking the street, without any awareness that he was being watched by 12 men who already knew what he'd done and had already decided what they were going to do about it. Mason waited until Derek went inside. Give him 2 minutes. Let him figure out they're gone. They watched through the trailer's front window. Derek's silhouette moved through the living room, into the kitchen, back to the living room, then into the hallway, then back to the living room again, faster this time. Then he stopped. His silhouette went still. Perfectly, completely still, the way a person goes still when reality hits them in the chest. Blade smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. He just figured it out. Derek came back to the front door, threw it open, looked up and down the street, his head swiveling like something mechanical. Then he pulled out his phone. "He's calling someone," Jace said. "Probably Sarah," Hawk said. "Good luck with that." They watched Derek pace in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenching and unclenching at his side. His voice carried across the street, muffled by distance, but loud enough to hear the tone. Angry, getting angrier. Then he threw the phone. They heard it hit something inside the trailer, a wall or a counter, the sharp crack of plastic on a hard surface. "That's our cue," Mason said. 4 men climbed out of the truck. The others emerged from their positions along the street. 8 men walking toward the blue trailer in the fading amber light, their boots crunching on gravel, their shadows stretching out behind them like giants. Derek saw them coming. His face changed. The anger drained out of it, and something else rushed in, something he probably hadn't felt in a long time. He stepped back inside the trailer, slammed the door. They heard the lock click. Mason walked up the crooked steps, knocked on the door 3 times. Derek Holt opened the door. "We need to talk." Derek's voice came from inside, muffled, trying to sound tough through a closed door. "Get the hell off my property or I'm calling the cops." "Go ahead. Call them." Silence. Because Derek knew exactly what Mason knew. That the only cop he could call was his cousin Wade, and Wade was 40 minutes away in the next county on a shift that didn't end until 11. And calling anyone else meant answering questions about why his girlfriend and her daughter had disappeared from a trailer full of empty beer bottles and bloodstains on the carpet. Mason knocked again. "We can do this easy or we can do this hard. Your choice." The door opened. Derek stood there. He was bigger up close, taller than Mason by 2 inches, heavier by 20 pounds. His face was flushed from the beer he'd already opened and from something else. His hands were at his sides, but they weren't relaxed. They were positioned, ready. But his eyes gave him away. Fear, buried under the posture and the cease and the practiced meanness, but there, swimming behind the surface like something trying not to drown. "Who the hell are you?" "We're friends of Sarah and Lily." Derek's face twisted. Something ugly passed across it, the kind of expression that revealed exactly who a person was underneath whatever mask they wore in public. "That woman took my kid and ran." "She's not your kid," Blade said from behind Mason. His voice was quiet. The quietness was worse than shouting. Derek's eyes shifted to Blade, then to the other men standing behind Mason, then back to Mason. He was counting, processing, calculating odds. The math wasn't good. "What is this? You here to threaten me?" "We're here to deliver a message." "Yeah, what message?" "You're done. Sarah and Lily are somewhere you'll never find them. You're not going to look for them. You're not going to call them. You're not going to drive past their work or their school. You're done." Derek laughed. It was a mean, ugly sound, the laugh of a man who has spent years being the biggest person in every room and can't imagine a world where that doesn't matter. "You can't tell me what to do. We just did." Derek's right hand moved toward his belt, slowly, like he was scratching an itch. But Mason saw the motion. He'd been watching for it. "Don't." Mason's voice didn't rise, didn't change pitch, didn't speed up, but it carried something that volume couldn't replicate. Certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of a man who had been in situations like this before and had never once been the one who walked away worse. Derek's hand froze. His fingers were 3 inches from the knife clipped to his belt. "You pull that knife, this goes a very different direction. And trust me, Derek, you don't want that direction." Derek's jaw clenched. His hand dropped to his side. The moment passed, but something in the air had changed. The pretense was gone. The mask was off. Everyone standing on those crooked steps knew exactly what kind of man Derek Holt was. Hawk stepped forward. His voice was gravel. "We know what you have been doing. We've seen the bruises. We've heard Lily's story. And we've got documentation. Photographs, text messages, medical records. You can't prove anything." Derek's voice wavered. A crack in the foundation. "We don't have to prove it in court," Chase said. "We just have to make sure the right people see it." Derek's face went pale. "What's that supposed to mean?" Wire held up his phone. "Your boss at the plastics factory, I've got his email right here. HR department too. Union rep. Funny what happens when people find out you've been putting your hands on a woman and a 7-year-old kid." Derek's eyes went wide. The fear was on the surface, now naked, exposed, and underneath it, the rage of a man who is losing control of the only thing he ever controlled, other people's fear of him. "You can't do that." "We can," Wire said, "and we will, unless you do exactly what we say." Derek looked from face to face. 8 men, 8 expressions that all said the same thing. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, out of options. "What do you want?" His voice came out smaller, deflated, the voice of a bully who had finally met something bigger than himself. "You're going to pack a bag," Mason said. "You're going to leave Riverton. Tonight. And you're never coming back. If you do, we'll know. And next time we won't be this polite. You can't make me leave my own town." "You got a record, Derek." Hawk's voice was flat. "Assault, battery, violating a restraining order that expired only because nobody renewed it. 1 phone call and we can have you back in county lockup by morning. Or you can leave on your own terms. Your choice." Derek's breathing was heavy. His face was red. The veins in his neck stood out like ropes. But he wasn't stupid. Cruel, yes. Violent, yes. But not stupid. He could read the room. Fine. He spat the word like it tasted bad. Fine. I'll leave. Tonight, Mason said. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. Derek glared at him with every ounce of hatred a cornered man could produce. Yeah. Tonight. Good. Pack your stuff. We'll wait. Derek turned and walked back into the trailer. They heard him throwing things, cursing, the sound of drawers being pulled open and slammed shut, the thud of heavy objects being dropped into a bag. He came back out 15 minutes later, a duffel bag stuffed with clothes slung over one shoulder, his truck keys in his hand. He stopped at the top of the crooked steps and looked back at Mason. You tell Sarah she's making a mistake. Tell her she'll regret this. Mason's face didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't move. She won't. Derek walked past them, down the steps, across the gravel, got into his truck. The engine roared to life, too loud, the exhaust rattling. He backed out of the driveway, fast tires spitting gravel, the truck fishtailing slightly on the uneven road. The taillights disappeared down Miller Road, shrinking to red dots. Then nothing. Hawk watched the empty road. Think he'll stay gone. Mason pulled out his phone, made a call. It rang twice. A voice on the other end. Deep. Careful. The voice of a man who measured every word before he let it go. Yeah, Briggs, it's Mason. I need a favor. Briggs, former sheriff of Riverton County, retired 6 years, but he still had connections in every law enforcement agency within 200 miles. The kind of man who could make a phone call at 9 in the evening and have answers by morning. He'd worked with the Steel Ravens before, not officially, never officially, but in the way that men who believe in justice sometimes work together when the official channels have been corrupted. Talk to me. Derek Holt. Assault record. Used to live on Miller Road in Riverton. He just left town. I need eyes on him. If he comes back within 100 miles of this place, I need to know immediately. What did he do? Beat his girlfriend. Beat her 7-year-old daughter. Briggs was quiet for 3 seconds. When his voice came back, it was different. Harder, like steel cooling after being pulled from a furnace. Consider it done. I've got people in 3 counties. If he so much as buys gas in Riverton's direction, you'll know. There's something else. His cousin is Deputy Wade Pruitt, Sheriff's Department. He's been covering for Derek, quashing domestic calls, burying reports. Briggs was quiet again. Longer this time. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. We've got the call records. Wire pulled them. Then I'll make some calls of my own. State level. Pruitt's not untouchable. Nobody is. Thanks, Briggs. You get that woman and child somewhere safe. Already done. Good. Men like Holt don't stop on their own. They stop when someone stops them. That's the plan. Mason hung up, looked at his men. Let's go. They walked back to the truck. The motorcycles started one by one, each engine a declaration that filled the empty street. They rode away from Miller Road as the last light of the day bled out along the horizon. Behind them, the blue trailer sat empty. Dark windows, crooked steps, the ghost of what it had been. But it wasn't over. Mason knew it. Hawk knew it. Every man in the club knew it. Men like Derek Holt didn't leave quietly. They left loudly and then they came back. 3 days passed. Sarah stayed in bed for most of it. Dr. Kane came twice, changed her bandages, monitored her breathing, declared the ribs stable but fragile. Lily stayed close. She slept on a cot beside her mother's bed, biscuit in one arm, the second rabbit in the other. Helen brought them meals, sat with Sarah when Lily was napping, talked to her in the quiet, patient way that women talk to other women who have been through things that no one should have to go through. On the 4th morning, Helen called Mason. We have a problem. Mason was sitting in the back room at Grinder's bar going through club business. He set down his pen. What kind of problem? CPS called the shelter's main line this morning. Someone filed a report claiming Sarah kidnapped a minor child from a custodial guardian. Mason went still. Who filed it? Derek Holt. Through his cousin. The report lists Derek as Lily's legal guardian with custodial rights. That's a lie. He's not her father. Doesn't matter what's true, Helen said. Her voice was controlled but sharp. What matters is what's on paper. And apparently there's a guardianship document filed with the county clerk's office that gives Derek Holt shared custodial rights over Lily Carson. Mason's hand tightened around the phone. It's a forgery. Has to be. Probably. But CPS doesn't investigate the validity of guardianship documents. That's a court matter. In the meantime, they're required to investigate the allegation. A caseworker is coming to do an evaluation tomorrow morning of Sarah, and of Lily. They want to assess whether Lily is in a safe environment, whether Sarah is a fit parent. Mason stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. Sarah is the victim. She's the one with broken ribs. She's the one who was beaten nearly to death. I know that. You know that. But the system doesn't know that yet. All the system has is a report filed by a man claiming his custody rights have been violated. And until a court rules otherwise, that report triggers an automatic investigation. Mason closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them, his face was the face of a man who had just realized that the fight wasn't going to be won with fists. What do we need? A lawyer, a good one. Someone who knows family court, knows CPS procedures, and is willing to work fast. I know someone, Mason said. Nora Whitfield. She used to do pro bono work for the shelter network in Greensboro. Family law. Sharp as a blade and twice as patient. Get her on the phone today, Helen said. The caseworker comes at 9 tomorrow. We need to be ready. Mason called Nora Whitfield within the hour. She listened for 12 minutes without interrupting, which was how Mason knew she was good. Bad lawyers interrupted. Good lawyers listened. When he finished, Nora spoke. I'll drive down tonight. I want to talk to Sarah before the caseworker arrives. And I want to see that envelope, every document, every photograph. It's yours. One more thing. Does Lily understand what's happening? Mason paused. She knows she's safe. She knows her mother's hurt. I don't know how much she understands about the legal side. She needs to understand. Not everything, but enough. If CPS interviews her, and they will, she needs to be prepared. Not coached. Prepared. There's a difference. I know the difference. Good. I'll be there by 8 tonight. Nora Whitfield arrived at the cabin at 7:45. She was tall, mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a knot and glasses that she pushed up her nose every 30 seconds, like a nervous habit that had outlasted the nervousness. She carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been to war and a legal pad that was already half full of notes she'd written during the drive. She sat with Sarah for an hour. Sarah talked. Nora listened. When Sarah broke down, Nora waited. When Sarah finished, Nora asked questions, specific, precise, the kind of questions that mapped the shape of a case, the way a surveyor maps terrain. Then she asked to see the envelope. Mason handed it over. Nora spread the contents across the kitchen table. Photographs, screenshots, the unsigned divorce petition. She studied each piece for a long time, her pen moving across her legal pad in sharp, angular script. This is strong, she said finally. The photographs are dated. The text messages show a clear pattern of threats. And the divorce petition shows intent to leave, which undermines any claim that Sarah was content in the relationship. She looked up. But we have a problem, the guardianship document. If Derek filed a forged document with the county clerk and nobody challenged it, then as far as the court is concerned, it's valid until proven otherwise. And proving otherwise takes time. More time than we have before tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? The caseworker evaluates. They interview Sarah. They interview Lily. They assess the living situation. And they make a recommendation to the court. What's the worst case? Nora took off her glasses, cleaned them on her shirt. Worst case, the caseworker determines that Sarah is in an unstable living situation, no permanent address, no income, hiding in a cabin off the grid, and recommends temporary placement for Lily, which means foster care. Mason's face went hard. That's not happening. It won't, if we're prepared. Sarah has a strong case and the evidence in this envelope is powerful, but the caseworker doesn't make legal judgments. They assess immediate safety. So we need to show them that Lily is safe, that Sarah is receiving medical care, that there's a plan in place. There is a plan, then we present it, clearly, calmly, with documentation, and we let Lily tell her story. She looked toward the bedroom where Lily was sleeping. That girl walked 30 minutes alone to ask strangers for help. She found evidence her mother had been hiding for months. If CPS asks her what happened, she's going to tell them the truth because that's what she does. And the truth is the strongest thing we have. The caseworker arrived at 9 the next morning. Her name was Patricia Morrow, mid-30s professional carrying a clipboard and a neutral expression that gave away nothing. She shook hands with Helen with Nora and asked to see Sarah and Lily separately. She spoke with Sarah first. In the bedroom door closed. Nora sat beside Sarah as her attorney. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Then Patricia asked to speak with Lily. Nora walked Lily to the living room, sat her down on the couch. Patricia pulled a chair across from her and sat. Lily, my name is Patricia. I work for an agency that helps make sure children are safe. I'd like to ask you some questions. Is that okay? Lily looked at Nora. Nora nodded. Lily looked back at Patricia. Okay. Patricia asked simple questions at first. How old are you? What grade are you in? Do you like school? What's your favorite subject? Then the questions shifted. Can you tell me about the man who lived with you and your mom? Lily's hands tightened on Biscuit, but she didn't look away. She didn't freeze. She didn't retreat into the silence she'd been trained to keep. His name is Derek. He hurt my mom. He hurt me too. Can you tell me more about that? Lily told her. She told her about the nights, the yelling, the sound of her mother being hit, the time Derek threw her against the wall, the time he ripped Biscuit's ear off. She told her about learning to be quiet, about wearing long sleeves, about lying to Miss Fredericks at school. She told her about the morning she found her mother on the couch, unable to stand. And she told her about the walk to Grinder's bar, about pushing open a door she'd never opened before and running to a table full of men she'd never met and showing them the worst thing about her life because there was nobody else left to show. She told her about the envelope, how she'd found it under her mother's pillow, how she'd carried it out of the trailer without knowing exactly what was inside, only knowing it mattered. Patricia's pen had stopped moving somewhere around the middle of the story. She was just listening now. Not writing, not checking boxes, just sitting across from a 7-year-old child who had done something most adults would not have had the courage to do and letting the weight of it settle in the room. When Lily finished, the cabin was very quiet. Patricia looked down at her clipboard for a long moment. Then she asked one more question. Lily, do you feel safe here? Lily looked around the cabin, at the fire in the fireplace, at the clean floors, at Helen standing in the kitchen, at Nora sitting beside her, at the bedroom door behind which her mother was resting. Yes, for the first time I feel safe. Patricia nodded. She wrote something on her clipboard. Then she stood. Thank you, Lily. You've been very brave. She spoke with Nora and Helen outside on the porch. Mason stood nearby, but didn't approach unless addressed. I'll be filing my report this afternoon, Patricia said. Based on my evaluation, Lily is in a safe and stable environment with appropriate adult supervision and medical care. I see no grounds for removal at this time. Nora exhaled. However, Patricia continued, the guardianship claim filed by Mr. Holt will need to be resolved in family court. Until then, this matter remains open. I'd recommend filing a motion to dismiss the guardianship document as fraudulent as soon as possible. Already drafted, Nora said. Filing this afternoon. Good. Patricia looked at Mason. She studied him the way she probably studied every person in every case she worked. You're with the motorcycle club. Yes, ma'am. You understand that the court will want to know who's involved in this child's life. Your name may come up. I understand. Patricia nodded. Then she got in her car and drove away down the dirt road. Mason turned to Nora. How long to get the guardianship thrown out? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I need to prove the document it is forged, which means handwriting analysis, notary verification, and probably a subpoena for the clerk who processed it. Derek was sloppy. It won't hold up. But the wheels of justice turn slowly. And while they're turning, Lily stays with Sarah. CPS has no grounds for removal. We just need to keep everything stable and documented. 2 weeks. Mason could work with 2 weeks, but Derek Holt didn't give them 2 weeks. It was the 11th night, past midnight. The cabin was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers that glowed orange in the dark living room. Sarah was asleep in the bedroom. Lily was on her cot beside the bed, Biscuit tucked under her chin, the second rabbit wedged between her arm and her side. She was dreaming. A good dream for once. Something about a park and ice cream and her mother laughing. A sound she hadn't heard in real life for longer than she could remember. Then something woke her. Not a sound. An absence of sound. The crickets outside the window had stopped. All of them at the same time, the way crickets stop when something moves through the dark that doesn't belong there. Lily opened her eyes. The cabin was dark. The only light came from the embers in the next room, a faint orange glow that barely reached the bedroom doorway. She lay still, listened. A footstep. Outside the window. Soft, careful, the kind of step made by someone who was trying very hard not to be heard. Then another. Then a shadow passed across the window. A shape tall, broad-shouldered, moving slowly along the side of the cabin. The shape stopped, turned toward the glass, and in the faint light that filtered through the thin curtain, Lily saw a face. Derek. Her blood went cold, every muscle in her body locked. The old fear rushed back like a wave, filling her chest, her throat, her lungs, drowning the part of her that had started to believe it was over. He was here. He'd found them, just like he always said he would. Her hands shook. Her heart hammered so loud she was afraid he could hear it through the glass. She wanted to pull the blanket over her head. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be small and invisible and silent the way she'd been for the past year, the way he'd taught her to be. But then she heard another voice, not Derek's, not anyone in the room. A voice from 3 days ago, from a man with a scar on his face who had knelt down in front of her and said words she had carried in her chest like a stone. You did the right thing. You came to the right place. Lily didn't pull the blanket over her head. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't freeze. She moved. She reached across the cot slowly, carefully, and picked up her mother's phone from the small table. She'd memorized Mason's number. He'd made her repeat it 3 times at the cabin, once for each digit until she could say it in her sleep. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Yeah. Mason's voice, alert, awake, like he'd been waiting for this call. He's here, Lily whispered. Derek is outside the window. Silence on the other end. 1 second, 2. Are the doors locked? Yes. Is your mama awake? No. Good. Keep her asleep. Keep quiet. Don't turn on any lights. I'm 15 minutes away. Lily hung up. Then she did something that no one had told her to do. Something that came from inside her, from the same place that had pushed her out the door of the trailer 3 days ago, from the same place that had driven her feet across 30 minutes of sidewalk to a bar full of strangers. She opened her mother's phone camera, turned off the flash, held the phone up toward the window with shaking hands, and she recorded. Derek's shadow moved past the window again. This time he paused, leaned closer, cupped his hands around his eyes, and pressed his face against the glass, trying to see inside. The phone captured it, his face distorted by the glass, his hands pressed flat against the window. The shape of him standing where he should not have been standing, doing what he should not have been doing, violating the emergency protective order that Nora had filed 4 days ago. Lily's hands shook so badly the video was unsteady, but it was clear enough to see who it was, clear enough to hold up in any court. She heard the sound of a truck engine in the distance, growing louder. Then gravel crunching. Headlights swept across the trees. Derek heard it too. His shadow pulled back from the window. She heard his footsteps fast now, no longer trying to be quiet, crashing through the brush at the edge of the clearing. Then the truck door opened. Voices. Mason's voice giving commands. Other voices responding. Boots on the ground moving fast. Then a shout from the tree line. A scuffle. The sound of a man being brought down hard on the ground. A grunt. A curse. Then Mason's voice, calm, steady, final. Stay down, Derek. It's over. Lily sat on the cot, phone in her hands, and breathed. The tears came then, but not the old tears, not the tears of fear and helplessness that she'd cried on her mattress on Miller Road with her hands pressed over her ears. These were different. These were the tears that come after a battle, when you realize you survived, and you didn't survive by hiding. You survived by fighting back. Mason called Wire. Wire arrived within the hour. Lily handed him her mother's phone with the video still on screen. Wire watched it twice, then backed it up to 3 separate cloud accounts and emailed a copy to Nora Whitfield and Briggs. Derek Holt was held on the ground by 4 bikers until Briggs arrived with 2 state police officers. Not county, not Riverton, state. Derek was arrested on the spot. Violation of an emergency protective order, stalking, criminal trespass. The state officers put him in the back of their cruiser without asking Wade Pruitt's opinion, because Wade Pruitt was no longer relevant. Briggs had made his calls. The state attorney general's office had opened a preliminary investigation into Wade Pruitt for obstruction of justice and failure to enforce domestic violence statutes. Wade was suspended pending review. Mason stood in the clearing and watched the state police cruiser disappear down the dirt road, its taillights shrinking into the dark between the trees. Hawk stood beside him. "The girl caught him," Hawk said quietly. "Not us. The girl." Mason nodded. He looked toward the cabin window where a 7-year-old girl had held up a phone in the dark with shaking hands and done what no one else could do. "Yeah, she did." Inside the cabin, Lily sat on her cot. Sarah was awake now, sitting up in bed despite the pain in her ribs holding her daughter's hand. "You recorded him, yeah." Sarah stared at her daughter. Tears ran down her face. "Baby, you are the bravest person I have ever known." Lily leaned against her mother's arm. She was exhausted. The adrenaline was gone, and what was left was a tiredness so deep it went past her muscles and her bones and settled somewhere in the center of who she was. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She held Biscuit against her chest. Both ears. The old one with the missing ear and the new one with both ears intact. "We're gonna be okay, Mama." Sarah pressed her lips to the top of Lily's head. "Yeah, baby, we are." And for the first time in a very long time, both of them believed it. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish. It was a small room in the Riverton County Courthouse, second-floor east wing with tall windows that let in pale morning light and wooden benches that creaked when people shifted their weight. An American flag stood in the corner beside the judge's bench. A clock on the wall ticked with the kind of steady mechanical patience that courts are built on. Derek Holt sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed to a chain around his waist. His face was thinner than it had been 3 weeks ago. County lockup had taken the swagger out of him. He sat with his shoulders hunched forward and his eyes on the table, not looking at anyone, not looking at the gallery behind him, where 12 men in leather vests sat in 2 rows. The Steel Ravens had come in force. Mason sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. Hawk beside him, Blade on the other side, Jace Wirepatch and the others filling the row behind. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was a statement that required no words. Sarah sat at the prosecutor's table beside the assistant district attorney, a woman named Rachel Odom, who had been assigned the case after the state attorney general's office flagged it as a priority. Sarah's ribs were still healing. She moved carefully, each breath still measured, but she was sitting upright. She was dressed in clothes Helen had helped her pick out. Clean, simple. The face of a woman who had been through something terrible and had survived it, and whose survival was written in the way she held her spine straight despite the pain. Nora Whitfield sat beside her as co-counsel. The manila envelope's contents had been entered into evidence 3 days earlier. Photographs, text messages, the unsigned divorce petition, medical records from Dr. Kane, the CPS evaluation report, and the video. The video Lily had recorded through the cabin window. It had been played for the grand jury 2 weeks ago. 23 citizens had watched a 7-year-old girl's shaking footage of a man pressing his face against a window in the middle of the night, violating a protective order, stalking a woman and child he had beaten for over a year. The grand jury had returned an indictment in under 40 minutes. Derek Holt was charged with 3 counts of domestic assault, 1 count of child abuse, 1 count of violation of a protective order, 1 count of stalking, and 1 count of forgery for the fabricated guardianship document. The forgery charge had been the easiest to prove. Wire had traced the notary stamp on the document to a man named Gary Fells, a friend of Wade Pruitt's, who had notarized the document without ever meeting Sarah or witnessing any signatures. Fells had cooperated with investigators within hours of being questioned because men like Gary Fells always cooperated when the alternative was prison. Wade Pruitt was not in the courtroom. He was in a different kind of trouble. The state investigation had expanded beyond Derek's case. Investigators had pulled 4 years of domestic violence call records for Riverton County and found a pattern. Calls that should have led to arrests that didn't. Reports that should have been filed that weren't. Victims who had called for help and been told by a deputy in uniform that there was nothing the department could do. 14 cases, 14 women and families who had called 911 and been failed by a man who wore a badge and used it as a wall. Wade Pruitt had been terminated from the sheriff's department pending criminal charges. His hearing was scheduled for the following month. But today was about Derek, and today was about Lily. The prosecutor called her name at 10:15 in the morning, Lily Carson. Lily stood from her seat in the gallery. She was wearing a blue dress that Helen had bought for her. Her hair was brushed and pulled back with a clip. She held Biscuit in her left hand, the one with the missing ear. She'd asked the judge's clerk that morning if she could bring him to the witness stand. The clerk had said yes. She walked to the front of the courtroom. Her sneakers made soft sounds on the hardwood floor. The room was silent except for those footsteps and the ticking of the clock. She climbed into the witness chair. It was too big for her. Her feet didn't touch the floor. She placed Biscuit on her lap, both hands resting on his worn fabric body. The bailiff administered the oath. Lily raised her right hand. Her voice was small but clear. I do. Rachel Odom stood and approached the witness stand. She moved slowly the way you approach a child who has been through enough to distrust the world. Lily, can you tell the court your full name? Lily Marie Carson. How old are you, Lily? 7. Lily, I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened at your home on Miller Road. Take your time. If you need a break, just say so, okay? Okay, Rachel began with simple questions. Where did you live? Who lived with you? How long had Derek been in the home? Then the questions deepened. Lily, can you tell the court what happened the night before you went to get help? Lily's hands tightened on Biscuit. She looked down at the rabbit for a moment. Then she looked up. Her eyes found Mason in the gallery. He gave her a small nod, almost imperceptible. But she saw it. She began. She told the court about the sound of the front door slamming open, about Derek's voice slurred and angry, about the slapping sounds, about her mother's screams, about lying on her mattress with her hands over her ears, squeezing Biscuit, whispering to him that everything would be okay. She told them about the morning after, finding her mother on the couch unable to move, the swollen eye, the split lip, the broken ribs that made every breath sound like something tearing. She told them about the decision she made, to stop being quiet, to walk out the door and find someone who could help. She told them about the walk, 30 minutes, old sneakers with a hole in the toe, past the gas station and the laundromat and the corner store, across the street to Grinder's bar, where she pushed open a heavy door and ran to a table full of men she had never met. She told them about pulling down the collar of her jacket and showing them the bruises. The courtroom was completely still. No one shifted, no one coughed. The clock ticked, and Lily's voice carried through the quiet room like something fragile and unbreakable at the same time. Rachel's voice was gentle. Lily, why did you go to the bikers for help? Because I tried telling adults before. I told the counselor at school. She called my mom. My mom said everything was fine. And that night, Derek hurt me worse than ever. He said it was what happened when I told people things that were none of my business. Lily paused. She swallowed. So I stopped telling. I stopped talking about it. I learned to be quiet. But that morning when I saw my mom on the couch and she couldn't get up, I decided I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. Rachel let the silence hold for a moment. Then she asked her final question. Lily is the man who hurt you and your mother in this courtroom today. Lily turned her head. She looked directly at Derek Holt. He was staring at the table. He didn't look up. He didn't meet her eyes. Yes, he's sitting right there, she pointed. Her hand was steady. Derek Holt's attorney offered a plea deal that afternoon, guilty on all counts in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. The judge accepted the plea, but made his own determination on sentencing. Derek Holt was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. When the sentence was read, Lily was sitting between her mother and Mason in the gallery. Sarah's hand was in hers. Mason's hand rested on the back of the bench behind them, not touching, just closed the way a wall stands close to the thing it protects. Lily didn't react when the judge spoke. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She sat very still and listened to the numbers 12 years, 8 years, and understood in the way that children understand things they can feel but not fully explain that a door had just closed. A heavy door, a locked door, a door that would not open for a very long time. Sarah cried, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide. She squeezed Lily's hand and whispered 2 words, "It's over." Lily leaned against her mother's arm. "I know, Mama." Outside the courthouse, the sunlight was almost painful after the dim courtroom. Mason walked beside Sarah and Lily down the wide stone steps. The other steel ravens followed their boots heavy on the concrete, their vests catching the light. Reporters stood at the bottom of the steps, cameras and microphones thrust forward. Mason put himself between the cameras and Lily without being asked. Blade and Hawk flanked Sarah. They walked to the truck in formation, shielding the two people who mattered most from the attention they hadn't asked for. Nora Whitfield handled the press. She stood on the courthouse steps and spoke clearly into the cluster of microphones. Today, a 7-year-old girl's courage brought a violent man to justice and exposed a system that had been failing domestic violence victims in this county for years. Lily Carson did what adults and institutions could not. She told the truth, and the truth was enough. In the truck driving away from the courthouse, Lily sat between Mason and Blade. She stared out the window at the town scrolling past, the gas station, the laundromat, the corner store. The same route she had walked that day, the longest walk of her life, the walk that had changed everything. Mason glanced at her. "You okay, kid?" Lily thought about it. Really thought about it the way she thought about everything now, with a seriousness that made adults pause. "Yeah, I think I am." Mason nodded. "That's good. That's real good." She looked up at him. "Mason, yeah, thank you." Mason's throat tightened. He looked straight ahead. The scar on his face caught the light from the window. "You don't have to thank me, Lily. You're the one who did the hard part. All of it, every step. But you came when I called. Every time I called, you came." Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with gravel or whiskey. "That's the deal, kid. You call, I come. That's how it works now. That's how it works from here on out." Lily nodded. She hugged Biscuit against her chest and watched the road ahead. Behind them inside the courthouse, Derek Holt was being led away in handcuffs. His head was down. His shoulders were slumped. He didn't look back. He didn't look at anyone. He was already becoming what he would be for the next 12 years. A number in a system that processed men like him the way a machine processes raw material, efficiently, indifferently, without sentiment. Wade Pruitt's reckoning came 6 weeks later. The state investigation had been thorough. 14 domestic violence calls over 4 years. 14 reports that should have led to arrests, to protective orders, to interventions that might have saved women from broken bones and children from bruises that shaped the rest of their lives. 14 times Wade Pruitt had answered those calls and written the same words in his reports. Unfounded. No evidence of criminal activity. Parties advised. Case closed. The state charged him with 14 counts of obstruction of justice and 6 counts of official misconduct. He pled guilty to 4 of each in exchange for the rest being dropped. He was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security facility and permanently barred from law enforcement. The Riverton County Sheriff's Department underwent a complete review. New protocols were implemented. New officers were hired. A domestic violence liaison position was created, staffed by a woman named Deborah Sims, who had spent 20 years in victim advocacy and who had a zero-tolerance policy for officers who looked the other way. None of it would have happened without a manila envelope that a 7-year-old girl had found under a pillow. None of it would have happened without a video recorded through a window by hands that shook but didn't stop. The system had failed, and then it had been forced to fix itself not by politicians or bureaucrats, but by a child who had refused to be quiet. The apartment was on the east side of Riverton, a part of town that was neither good nor bad, but somewhere in between, the kind of neighborhood where people kept to themselves and mowed their lawns on Saturdays and didn't ask questions about where you came from as long as you were quiet and paid your rent on time. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced a small courtyard, a living room with enough space for a couch, a table, and a bookshelf that Helen had brought from the shelter's donation room. The front door had 3 deadbolts. Mason had installed them himself along with a chain lock and a peephole. The windows had new latches. The building had a security camera at the entrance, something the landlord had added 2 years ago after a break-in that had made the local paper. The steel ravens covered the first 3 months of rent. Helen helped Sarah apply for assistance, get her identification replaced, and enroll Lily in a new school. Nora handled the legal paperwork, the restraining order made permanent. The fraudulent guardianship document officially voided Sarah's divorce from Derek, finalized in absentia. Sarah got a job at a diner called Bonnell's. The owner, a heavy woman named Rosie Bonnell, who had been running the place for 22 years, was a friend of Wrench's wife. She hired Sarah on a handshake and started her on the morning shift. Good pay for a diner, flexible hours, Tips that were better than average because the regulars liked Sarah's quiet competence and the fact that she never got an order wrong. She could be home when Lily got out of school. That mattered more than the money. Lily started second grade at Lincoln Elementary, a small school 6 blocks from the apartment old brick building, good teachers, a playground with swings and a climbing wall. Her teacher was a young woman named Ms. Aldridge, who noticed on the first day that Lily was quiet but watchful, the kind of child who observed everything and said little until she had something worth saying. Lily made friends slowly. A girl named Sophie who liked to draw horses, a boy named Marcus who played soccer at recess and always picked Lily for his team, even though she was the smallest kid in class. She joined the art club. She started bringing her drawings home and taping them to the refrigerator, and Sarah would stand in front of them each evening and study each one like it hung in a museum. The bruises faded. The ones on Lily's shoulder went from purple to green to yellow to nothing. The ones on Sarah's face took longer, but they faded too, and the swelling in her eye went down, and the split in her lip healed, and the ribs knitted themselves back together the way bones do when they're given time and rest in the absence of violence. Lily still carried Biscuit, not everywhere anymore. Not to school, not to the store, not to the playground. But at night, always at night, the one-eared rabbit sat on her pillow beside the newer one, and she held them both when she slept, and the nightmares came less often, and the ones that came were less sharp, and sometimes she slept through the whole night without waking up at all. One Saturday morning, 3 weeks after they'd moved into the apartment, there was a knock at the door. Sarah looked through the peephole. Her body tensed for a moment, the old reflex, the one that might never fully go away. But it wasn't danger on the other side of the door. It was Mason. She opened it. "Hey, Mason." He stood in the hallway, leather vest, gray beard scar catching the fluorescent light. He held something in his hand. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "No, come in, please." He stepped inside. The apartment smelled like pancakes. Saturday morning pancakes, a tradition that Sarah had started the second week, because traditions were the bricks you used to build a normal life, and she was building as fast as she could. Lily ran out from the kitchen. Her face lit up in a way that made Mason's chest tight. "Mason." She hugged his leg. He ruffled her hair. "Hey, kid, how you doing?" "Good. Mama made pancakes. You want some? I'm okay. I just wanted to check in on you both." Sarah smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there. "We're doing good, really good." Mason looked around the apartment, at the furniture Helen had helped them pick out, at the drawings Lily had taped to the refrigerator, a horse, a cabin in the woods, a group of stick figures on motorcycles. At the calendar on the wall with Lily's school schedule marked in bright colors, art club on Tuesdays, soccer practice on Thursdays. This was what safety looked like, not the absence of danger, but the presence of ordinary things. Pancakes on Saturday, drawings on the refrigerator, a child who smiled without being told to. "How's the job?" he asked. "Good. Rosie's really kind. The other waitresses have been helping me learn the ropes. In school." He looked at Lily. "I like it. My teacher is Miss Aldridge. She's nice. She lets me sit by the window." Mason nodded. Then he held out the object in his hand, a framed photograph. He'd taken it from the trailer on Miller Road the day they'd carried Sarah out. He'd kept it in his jacket pocket, then in a drawer at the clubhouse, waiting for the right moment. The photo showed Sarah and Lily at a park. Green grass, a blue sky, a playground in the background. Both of them were smiling. Lily looked about 5, her hair shorter, her face rounder, no shadows behind her eyes. Sarah looked like a different person. Younger, lighter, unbroken. "Thought you might want this," Mason said. Sarah took it, her hands trembled. She stared at the photo for a long time, her thumb tracing the edge of the frame. "I didn't even realize it was gone. Figured you should have it. Remind you of the good times. There were good times before all this." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was still smiling. Lily came over and looked at the photo. "That was Jefferson Park. I was 5. "You remember?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, we had ice cream." "You let me get 2 scoops, Sarah laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, the kind of sound that fills a room and makes everyone in it feel something they can't name. "I did, didn't I?" Mason stood. "I should get going." "Wait." Sarah set down the photo. "Before you go, I need to say something." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked him in the eyes. The swelling was gone. The bruises were gone. What remained was a face that had been tested by the worst and had come through not undamaged, but intact. You saved us. You didn't have to. You didn't know us. But you showed up when nobody else would. You gave us a chance at a real life. I will never be able to repay that. Mason shook his head. Lily's the one who saved you. She had the courage to ask for help. I just answered the phone. And you had the courage to answer. Don't pretend that's nothing. They stood there for a moment, two people who understood something about each other that most people never have to learn. That the world is capable of terrible cruelty, and that it is also capable sometimes of unexpected grace. Lily tugged on Mason's sleeve. Are you leaving? Yeah, kid. Gotta go. Will you come back? Mason knelt down, his knees cracked. He looked her in the eyes the same way he'd looked at her in the back corner of Grinder's bar on the day everything changed. Anytime you need me, I'll be here. You've got my number. You call, I answer. That's how it works, from now until forever. No exceptions. Lily nodded. Then she hugged him. Tight. The way a child hugs someone when they've learned that not all adults will let them down. Mason stood, walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Sarah, yeah, you were brave too. You got out. A lot of people don't. That takes real strength. Sarah's eyes glistened. Lily was the brave one. She's the one who ran for help. Mason looked at Lily, standing in the kitchen doorway with pancake batter on her sleeve and biscuit tucked under her arm. Yeah, she was. He walked out, down the stairs, to his motorcycle parked on the street. He started the engine, the familiar rumble that he'd heard 10,000 times and that never got old. As he pulled away, he glanced up at the apartment window. Sarah and Lily stood together looking down, Sarah's arm around her daughter's shoulders, Lily's hand raised in a small wave. Mason lifted 2 fingers off the handlebar. A salute, a promise. Then he rode away, and the sound of the engine faded into the morning, and the street was quiet, and the two of them stood at the window for a long time after he was gone. Winter came to Riverton. Snow covered the streets and the rooftops and the bare branches of the trees that lined the sidewalks. Christmas lights appeared in store windows and on porches and wrapped around lampposts downtown. Sarah had been promoted to shift manager at Bunnell's. Better pay, more responsibility. Rosie had started talking about retiring in a few years and wanted Sarah to consider taking over. Lily was thriving. Her grades were strong. She'd won an art contest at school, a painting of a cabin in the woods surrounded by pine trees with smoke rising from the chimney and 2 figures standing on the porch. Ms. Aldridge had it framed and hung in the school hallway. On Christmas Eve, Sarah and Lily were decorating a small tree in their living room. Real pine. Sarah had bought it from a lot on 3rd Street, the cheapest one. They had a Charlie Brown tree with uneven branches and a bare spot on one side that they turned toward the wall. They hung ornaments from a dollar store, lights that blinked in alternating colors, a star on top made of tinfoil and cardboard, a craft project from Lily's art club. There was a knock at the door. Sarah looked through the peephole. She opened the door. Mason stood there, Hawk beside him, Blade behind them. They were carrying bags. Merry Christmas, Mason said. Lily ran to the door. You came. Wouldn't miss it, kid. They came inside. Set the bags down. Sarah stared at them. What's all this gifts? From the club. They unpacked the bags. For Lily, art supplies, real ones, watercolor paints and canvas and brushes with wooden handles. Books, a soccer ball, a new winter coat, purple, her favorite color, warm enough for the coldest nights. For Sarah, a jacket. Warm, well-made, nothing fancy but nothing cheap either. A gift card to the grocery store, another to a clothing shop downtown. And at the bottom of one bag, wrapped in tissue paper, a stuffed rabbit. Brown, soft, both ears perfectly intact. Blade held it out to Lily, figured Biscuit could use a friend, someone to keep him company. Lily took the rabbit. She held it up beside Biscuit and looked at them both. The old one battle-scarred, one-eared, stuffing, thin from years of being held too tight, and the new one whole and clean and full. She hugged the new rabbit. Then she hugged Blade, who stood there stiffly for a moment before placing one large, awkward hand on the top of her head. They stayed for an hour, hot chocolate in mismatched mugs. Conversation that wandered from Lily's art contest to Hawk's opinion on the best way to cook a turkey to Blade's absolute refusal to sing Christmas carols, despite Lily's increasingly persuasive arguments. When they left, Lily stood at the window watching them walk to their motorcycles in the snowy street. The engine started. The sound rolled through the quiet night. Mama, yeah, baby, those are good men, aren't they? Sarah put her arm around her daughter, pulled her close. Yeah, baby, they are. I'm glad I found them. Me too. More than you'll ever know. Lily was 12, taller, stronger. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a ponytail most days. She played on the school soccer team midfielder, fast and fearless, in a way that made her coach shake his head and grin. Her grades were near the top of her class. She was reading books that most kids her age wouldn't touch, thick ones, serious ones, books about law and justice and the history of people who fought for others. She still had both biscuits. They sat on her bed side by side on the pillow. She didn't carry them anymore. But they were always there when she came home, and she still touched the old one's missing ear, sometimes the way a person touches a scar that is healed, but still has a story to tell. One Saturday afternoon, she stood in the kitchen helping her mother make dinner. The radio played softly in the background. Sarah was chopping vegetables. Lily was stirring sauce. Mama, yeah, do you ever think about that day, the day I ran to the bar? Sarah stopped chopping, set down the knife, looked at her daughter, at this tall, strong 12-year-old who bore so little resemblance to the trembling child in the red jacket that it sometimes felt like they were two different people, except they weren't. The courage was the same. The stubbornness was the same. The refusal to accept what the world told her was impossible, that was exactly the same. All the time. Do you think I did the right thing? Sarah walked over, knelt down so they were eye level, the way she hadn't had to kneel for a while because Lily was growing fast and the distance between them was shrinking every day. Baby, you did the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. You saved us. You saved me. I was so scared. I know. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear. The decision to act in spite of it. Lily nodded. She stirred the sauce. I don't miss him, but I miss that time sometimes. Not him, just the feeling of when it was over. When we drove away from the trailer and I knew we were never going back. Sarah pulled her close. That's the feeling of freedom, baby. The first moment of it. It's the sweetest thing in the world. Derek Holt had been in prison for 5 years. He would remain there for at least 3 more. He had tried once about a year into his sentence to contact Lily through social media. A message sent from a contraband phone, short and ugly, full of the same venom he'd always carried. Lily had blocked him immediately. Then she'd told her mother. Sarah had called Mason. Within 24 hours, the contraband phone had been confiscated by prison guards who had received an anonymous tip. Derek was placed in solitary for 30 days. He did not attempt to make contact again. Lily was 22. She graduated from college. Criminal justice degree. Minor in social work. She'd worked her way through school with scholarships and a part-time job at a legal aid clinic that served low-income families. She'd written her senior thesis on the failures of the domestic violence response system in rural counties using anonymized data from Riverton County as her case study. She was working at a nonprofit called Second Chance Alliance. It helped domestic violence survivors find safety housing, legal representation, and the kind of long-term support that the system almost never provided. She'd started as an intern her junior year. By the time she graduated, they'd offered her a full-time position as a case manager. The work was hard, not physically, emotionally. Every case was a mirror. Every woman who walked through the door with bruises and fear in her eyes was Sarah. Every child who sat in the waiting room holding a toy too tight was Lily. She learned to carry the weight without being crushed by it, the way Patch had taught her years ago during one of his visits to the apartment. He'd told her about combat medic training, about how you had to feel the urgency without letting it paralyze you, how you had to care without drowning. You build a wall inside yourself, Patch had said, not to keep the pain out, to keep yourself standing while you carry it. She'd built that wall, it held. Her office was small, but it was hers. A desk, a computer, a filing cabinet, a window that looked out onto a street lined with oak trees. On the wall beside her desk was a framed photograph. Her mother, and Mason, taken 5 years earlier at her high school graduation. All 3 of them smiling. Sarah in a blue dress, looking healthy and strong and so different from the woman on the couch that it was hard to believe they were the same person. Mason in his leather vest, his beard fully gray, now the scar a familiar feature that Lily had stopped noticing years ago. And Lily in the middle in her cap and gown, holding her diploma like a shield she'd earned. There was a knock on her office door. "Come in." A woman walked in, mid-30s, bruises on her face, a split lip that had been bleeding recently and was now held together with a butterfly bandage. Her left eye was swollen half shut. She wore a long-sleeved shirt in the middle of summer. She held the hand of a little boy, maybe 6 years old, brown hair, large eyes, bruises on both arms, the kind that came from being grabbed by someone much bigger and much stronger. Lily stood, her chest tightened, her hands went still at her sides. She knew this woman, not her name, not her story, but she knew her. She knew the way she held her shoulders slightly hunched, slightly turned as if trying to make herself a smaller target. She knew the way her eyes moved around the room, checking exits, checking threats, never resting. She knew the way she held her son's hand too tight, not because she was hurting him, but because she was afraid that if she let go, something terrible would take him away. Lily knew all of it. She'd lived all of it. "Hi, I'm Lily. Please have a seat." The woman sat down slowly, carefully, the way a person sits when sitting hurts. The boy climbed into her lap and pressed his face against her chest. "I don't know where else to go." The woman's voice shook. "I tried calling the police. They said without proof there's nothing they can do. I tried the shelter downtown, but they're full. I tried my sister, but she said she couldn't get involved." Lily's throat tightened. She kept her voice calm, steady, the way Mason's voice had been calm and steady in the back corner of Grinder's bar when a 7-year-old girl in a red jacket had shown him her bruises and asked for help. "You came to the right place. We're going to help you. Both of you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You promised." Lily reached across the desk and took the woman's hand. Held it. Firm. Present. "I promise. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore. We're going to find you somewhere safe. People who will protect you. And we're going to make sure you have everything you need to start over." The woman broke down. She covered her face with one hand, the other still holding her son, and cried the way Sarah had cried on that couch in the cabin, the way a person cries when they have finally found someone who believes them. The boy looked at Lily. His eyes were wide and scared and old in the way that children's eyes should never be old. "Are you going to save us?" Lily met his gaze. She held it. And something passed between them, a recognition, a current, the shared understanding of two people who have known what it feels like to be small and frightened, and trapped in a place where no one comes to help. "Yes, I am." She glanced at the photograph on the wall, at Mason's face, at her mother's face, at her own face, young and smiling and free. "Because someone did the same thing for me once, a long time ago when I was about your age. I walked into a room full of strangers and asked for help. And they said yes. They didn't know me. They didn't owe me anything. But they said yes. And it changed my life. And now it's my turn." Lily was 37. She ran the nonprofit, director of operations. 3 locations across the state, 42 employees, hundreds of women and children helped every year. A waiting list that never got shorter because the need never got smaller, because the world kept producing men like Derek Holt and systems like the one Wade Pruitt had corrupted, and the work was never finished. Sarah had retired from Bunnell's. Rosie had sold her the diner for $1, a symbolic price that carried the weight of 15 years of friendship and trust. Sarah had run it for 3 more years, then sold it to a young couple who promised to keep the name. She volunteered at the nonprofit twice a week, helped with intake, sat with women who were afraid to leave, shared her story when they needed to hear that survival was possible. Mason was 78. His knees were worse. His back was worse. The scar on his face had faded to a thin silver line that was almost invisible in certain light. But he still rode. Every Saturday, rain or shine, he threw a leg over his motorcycle and rode the back roads around Riverton alone or with whatever Steel Ravens wanted to join him. He'd passed the presidency of the club to Jace 10 years ago, but everyone still called him president and no one corrected them. Hawk had passed away 3 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep in the house he'd shared with his wife for over 40 years. The club had ridden in his funeral procession 32 motorcycles in a line that stretched half a mile down the main road. Lily had spoken at the service. She'd talked about a man who had sat in the back of a truck on a cold October afternoon and told a story about a sister he'd lost and how that story had fueled everything he'd done since. How he'd spent 30 years making sure what happened to his sister never happened to anyone he could reach. Blade had retired to a cabin in Montana. He sent Lily a card every Christmas with no return address and exactly 4 words written inside. Still quiet out here. Wire had started a cybersecurity firm that specialized in digital evidence collection for domestic violence cases. He testified as an expert witness 3 or 4 times a year and never charged the victim's attorneys a dime. Patch had opened a free clinic in South Riverton. He still carried his medical bag everywhere he went. The world had changed in 30 years. Some things were better. More resources for victims, more awareness, more people willing to say the words out loud. But some things were the same. Men still hit women. Children still hid in dark rooms with their hands over their ears. And the system still failed, not always, not everywhere, but enough. Enough that the work was never done. One afternoon in late spring, Lily was at her desk when her phone rang. Lily, it's Helen. Helen Marsh was 70 now, still running the shelter, still taking calls at all hours, still showing up when it mattered. Hey, Helen, what's going on? I've got a situation. 8-year-old girl walked into a gas station this morning, covered in bruises, told the clerk her stepdad was hurting her and her mom. The clerk called us. She's at the shelter now. Lily's heart clenched. 30 years in this work, and the clench never got smaller. It was the same clench she'd felt the first time, and the 100th time and every time in between, because every child was the same child, and every story was the same story, and the only thing that changed was the name. Where is she now? At the shelter, scared, traumatized. But she's talking. She asked the clerk something when she first walked in. What did she ask? Helen's voice was quiet. She asked if there were any bikers around who could help. Lily closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 7 years old again, standing across the street from Grinder's bar, with Biscuit pressed against her chest and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She could feel the cold October air. She could see the motorcycles parked in a row. She could feel the weight of the door as she pushed it open. She opened her eyes, picked up her phone. I know just who to call. She dialed the number she had memorized when she was 7 years old and had never forgotten. It rang 3 times, yeah. Mason's voice. Slower now, rougher. But the same voice, the same single word, the same readiness. It's Lily. I need a favor. Talk to me. There's a little girl at Helen's shelter. 8 years old, covered in bruises, asking for help, asking for bikers. Mason was quiet for a moment. Lily could hear the wind on the other end of the line. He was outside, probably on his porch. Probably looking at the road the way he always looked at the road, like it was a question that he would never stop answering. Then his voice came back, steady, sure. The same voice that had said the same words to a terrified child in a red jacket 30 years ago. We're on our way. Lily hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment, her hand still on the phone. The photograph on the wall caught the late afternoon light. 3 faces, 3 smiles. A moment frozen in time but not trapped in it. Living in it, growing from it, passing it forward. She stood, grabbed her keys, walked to the door. She had work to do, because when someone asks for help, you answer. Every time. No exceptions. That was the deal. That was the promise. That was the thing a 7-year-old girl had learned in the back corner of a bar on the wrong side of town from a man with a scar on his face who had knelt down in front of her and said the words that had changed everything. You came to the right place. And 30 years later, she was still proving him right. Not because she had to. Not because it was her job, though it was. Not because anyone expected it of her, though they did. But because she remembered. She remembered the cold October air and the hole in her sneaker and the weight of Biscuit in her arms. She remembered the sound of the bar door opening and the smell of beer and the sight of 12 men turning to look at a child who shouldn't have been there. She remembered the moment Mason's hand had touched her shoulder, the one without bruises, and something inside her had shifted a door opening in a wall she didn't know existed, letting in light she didn't know was possible. She carried that light now. She carried it the way she'd once carried Biscuit, close to her chest, against the beat of her heart, through every dark room and every difficult conversation and every late night when the weight of other people's suffering pressed down on her and tried to make her believe that it was too much, that the world was too broken, that one person couldn't make a difference. But one person could. She was proof. A 7-year-old girl in a red jacket walking 30 minutes through a town that had looked the other way, pushing open a door she'd never opened before, and saying the words that changed everything. I need help. And on the other side of that door, someone had answered.